Guys, I'm Nate from the internet. Today we are going to be taking a look at how to make a cosplay turtle shell for all of your Ninja Turtle or other turtle cosplay needs. So this is one that I built and I need to build 3 more. I'm gonna be walking you through the process I go through. This thing is lightweight, it's quite durable. You could attach it in a number of different ways depending on what your costume is gonna be. You could use Velcro, you could use backpack straps, whatever you think is gonna work, and it's also scalable. So you can just make this for a big person, you can shrink it down, make it for a small person. It's gonna work either way. This whole shell is going to be made out of EVA foam, other than, you know, the glue and the paint. And EVA foam comes in a lot of different forms, but one of the cheapest and easiest to get is floor mats. I got these from Harbor Freight because it is the cheapest source of floor mats that I know of, and they work great for this kind of stuff. So a single sheet of this foam is pretty good size, but it is actually just a little bit too small for the full-size turtle shell. So I'm going to cut 2 straight lines on these pieces of foam and glue it together so I have one bigger piece that I can use for the whole shell. Now, starting off, I did not have a 3D model. I didn't have a file that someone else had made. I was just going to be making this shell from scratch. So I started off by just grabbing a piece of foam. You can use the floor mat ones, or you can get some of the thinner craft foam, whatever you want to experiment with, to try and figure out what shape I was going for, how to get that turtle shell domed look to it. And then I was also thinking I kind of wanted the neck to maybe scoop up a little bit. I was mostly going for like a Ninja Turtles type shell. And so I was looking at pictures of like, oh, what do the Ninja Turtles shells look like? And, you know, do they have any of, you know, these different shapes to it? So yeah, I grabbed a piece of foam, and I have done a decent amount of stuff with foam in the past. So I have some general ideas of how the foam will move based on what sorts of cuts you put together. But the very basic idea is that you take a flat sheet, you cut a portion out of the foam, and when you put it together, forcing it together is going to change the topology. It's going to change the contours of the foam. If you have straight lines, it's going to sort of put one bend into it. If you have things like this where it gets wider at certain points, that's going to change how much it curves. When there's a wider gap, the foam is going to curve more aggressively to get those pieces to touch each other. If you are interested in foam smithing, like this is going to be a very basic and simple build. There's tons, and I mean tons of great tutorials out there. My favorites are from my friend Bill Duran, who, this is Foam Smith 3, but he's got obviously at least 2 others. And they're just absolutely full of amazing tips and tricks and how to make cool stuff out of foam. Now for gluing foam together, there's lots of things you can use. Hot glue is actually fairly popular because it's very simple, but it's not my favorite. It has a tendency to let go over time, especially if you ever leave something in a hot car. The general consensus is the best way to put foam together is by using contact cement. If you've never used contact cement before, it does not work the same as a lot of other types of glue. You don't put it on wet, stick things together, and wait for it to dry. You put it on both sides of whatever you're gluing, you wait for it to dry, and then you stick them together, and the contact cement will stick to itself. So with the contact cement, it is possible to have too little of it so it doesn't stick. It's really easy though to have too much of it, and then it's not going to dry properly, or the outside of it will start to dry, but it'll still be like gooey on the inside and it's not properly stuck to the stuff. So if you're trying to decide between too much and too little, go for too little. So measuring out our turtle shell. Like last time, I am going to center it so that seam we just made is kind of right along the middle. Just seems like a good place to do it. So I have the size of this shell, and then my next shell I want to be a little bit smaller. But as I said, it is going to curve in a little bit. So I'm going to add just a tiny bit of size onto this, and then after we've added all the curve to it, it should be an inch or so shorter. Now you could definitely do this on a piece of paper to create your pattern, but because I want it to be symmetrical on both sides, I'm actually just going to do half of it. I'm going to cut that out, and then I'm going to take the piece of foam that I cut off of it and put it on the other side as the mirror image pattern. So that's going to be half of our turtle shell. So now we're going to cut this out. We're going to take this piece of foam, like I said, flip it onto the other side as a mirror, trace it out to get the exact same shape. The basic shell shape is all cut out, so now we have to glue all 6 of these cut points together. That's what's going to give the shell its nice turtle shell curved shape. I'm using these little cut pieces of foam as my glue spreaders, but also I try and make sure it's fairly thin because I want to try and make sure that contact cement does get all the way down into the very bottom of the crack. Otherwise, when I glue it together, that portion of it isn't going to stick very well. It's something that I still struggle with for sure. Even though I know that's how you're supposed to do it, I don't always do quite a good enough job. And because it's more closed, it takes longer to dry. So sometimes I'm impatient and I try and stick things together. And up here it's nice and dry, but down there is not, and then it doesn't stick as well. Got glue on 4 of them, but I think my first one is getting to a point where it is dry enough to start sticking, maybe a little bit. Let's test. There we go, yep. We want to make sure that the seams stay nice and parallel and lined up to each other, because if I offset it a little bit, it's going to be really hard to fix later. This stuff, if you've got it properly applied, properly dried, and then you stick it together, it really does not like to come apart. In fact, you're likely to just tear the foam rather than undoing the glue. Ooh, and I did not do an amazing job of cutting this slot here. I have a sort of, I don't know how to describe it, garbled bit. I cut on top of an angle. My knife wasn't quite sharp enough, so that little spot probably not going to glue together very well, but we've got some ways to fix that afterward. All right, this is looking pretty good. We're getting some good turtle shell shape to it. 2 more to do. This is coming along nicely. I'm liking this. All right, that came together quite nicely. I'm very happy with the curves we got on that. Now, we can do a little bit more to add just a bit more curve in here. And what we're going to be doing is not any cutting and gluing, but we're actually just going to bend it into shape a little bit. This foam is somewhat flexible and it can stretch a little bit, even more so if you use a little bit of heat. So we're going to take a heat gun, we're just going to heat the foam up a little bit, and then we're going to press on it and try and get a little bit more curve into it so that our angles just become a little bit more flowing and organic. I'm just using my knee as a sort of form to press over this. I think we've done a good job of getting it just a little bit smaller. Not a lot, but a tiny bit smaller. That's good. So one thing I am going to do now is go in and just clean up the shape of the edge. Looking good. Now, you can see on the completed shell that there is more texture than just the one main shape. It's got the border that goes all the way around, and it's got each of the panels sticking out of the middle. So now I have to do those. For the border that goes all around, it's just going to be strips. So we're just going to cut out some strips about 1 inch wide from one of our mats, and we're going to shape those a little bit before gluing them on all the way around the edge of the shell. I've got all of the strips cut out that are going to go around the shell, but I do want to shape them. We don't want like this rectangular prism shape on the edge of the shell. We want all of those curved a little bit. There's several ways you can do that. You can use a knife, you can use some hand sandpaper. Since I have a nice belt grinder in the workshop with me, I'm just going to use that. This foam sands surprisingly well, and so I'm just going to use that to shape all of these into sort of a half round rather than the rectangle I got going on now. Started shaping the strips and just realized I wanted them all a little bit narrower. Again, I want to emphasize you do not need to have a professional grade knife grinding sanding belt to shape things like this. Like I said, you can use other things. You can use one of those little hand sanding belts, just flip it on its back and shape it on that, or you can just use the X-Acto knives. Make sure they're nice and sharp, cut it at an angle, and then just sand off the corners. Now, because I was using a fairly aggressive belt there, I've now just got some slightly smoother sandpaper. I'm just going over and taking down the rough texture a little bit. It's not a big change, just enough to make a difference. All right, we've got all of our pieces nice and shaped. Now we need to start attaching them to the shell. We want to try and make it so that they connect together as seamlessly as possible. There are a couple of markings that will go on the shell that are really good connection points because they'll hide a seam, but we still want to mitigate it as much as possible. So I'm going to measure the length that I want one piece to be, and I'm going to cut it at a little bit of an angle. I'm sort of doing miter cuts so that where the pieces meet up, it's a little bit smoother transition. In this case, I'm spreading probably more of this glue than I need. Now, shaping it, curving into place, I'm just gonna press it down against the foam, and that's gonna sort of smear some of the glue from one side onto the other. And then I know it's in the right spot. Before I glue these pieces on, I want to hit them with the heat gun, so if there's any shrinkage to it, that happens before it gets glued and not after. All right, all of the edge pieces are attached. They seem to be holding on quite nice and strongly. I'm just gonna take this back to the belt sander and clean up the edge just a little bit, make sure that all the transitions between the pieces I just attached and the main body are smooth, and then round out the inside corner a little bit. The edge is looking really good, so it's time to move on to all of the other bumps that are on the turtle shell. Now I'm gonna show you how I did this without going through the entire process, because I've already done it once, and while it works pretty well and it's not terribly hard, it does take a little bit of time. So what we're gonna need is some masking tape and a marker. And I am going over it twice with tape going in opposite directions, because when I peel this off, I want to be able to peel it off and cut it without having the tape all fall apart. I want it to stay together as a sheet. So having it go in multiple directions is really gonna help with that. Now, a shell like this shape is very curved, and the piece I'm doing is somewhat flat, not perfectly flat, but it's close to flat. And I wanna be clear that if you do have, the whole shell or something you're going over, you don't have to have it be in continual pieces of tape. You can do a patch here and patch here and patch here. As long as it just all gets taped together, then it should work just fine. All right, there we go. We've got a decent sized sheet of tape there. And so this is what you can use to create your patterns. So I'm gonna start just drawing right on the tape. I wanna have a piece that goes. Another one, like that. And like I said, we're just gonna change the shape up a little bit to make it fit on the tape better. A couple little side pieces. This little side piece is gonna get extra wonky because I ran out of tape, and that's because I didn't cover the whole shell. So we now have these shapes. We've got 4 of them drawn on, and our goal now is to take the tape off as one continuous sheet. We're gonna go from curved on the shell to flat as we're holding it. So it's probably gonna get really wrinkled and stuff. That's fine, it's not a problem. We've got some, you can see when I try and flatten that out, it gets all the fold lines in it and stuff. Now we're just gonna take scissors and cut them out of our tape. Now we can take a piece of our foam, and we can take our pattern pieces and stick it on the foam. If it lays flat, then great. You've got a piece that's gonna go on a flat enough section that you don't have to do anything. If you've got a piece that doesn't look like it quite wants to lay flat, then what you're gonna wanna do is add a cut into it that lets it open up a little bit, maybe two. It can open and lay flat, and you can see that there's some gaps between these lines. They're not big. In fact, on this particular one, it was barely curved, so these gaps are very small, but they are there. Now at this point, you can trace out your shape on the foam. Peel it off, and then you cut that out, and that is how you get your shape. That's gonna match exactly what was on the tape. Now, I've already gone through and done that with the first shell, and this is what I got. This is the pieces that I used on the first shell, and I want to replicate those same pieces on the next shells. So I saved the pattern bits, and I'm gonna put this down on my pieces of foam and cut them out to go on my new shell. The panels are all attached. It's looking really good. Now it's time to go through and add some texture to all of the shell bits. I want stuff going around the edge. I want stuff on each individual panel. And to do that, I'm gonna be using this rotary tool. This is basically an off-brand Dremel. And I've got two different things I'm gonna use. One's a little stone bit that's kind of cone-shaped, and the other is a little wire brush. And both of these will do a decent job of carving into the foam, just a little bit at a time. I should have decent control with them, so I'm gonna start with the wire brush and go around the outside, add some texture, add some segmentation to it. Should be good. Whoo, look at that. We've got texture all over our shell. That's looking really good. I really like how it's coming along. And now it is time to move on to painting it. Now, I said before that hitting it with the heat gun helps seal the foam so that it will absorb paint less and take a better texture. That's true, and while I have already hit everything here with the heat gun, I'm gonna do one more layer just to make sure. Some of those side edges might be kind of open-celled still, and we're just gonna do that real quick. So, heat gun. I'm using the high heat on the heat gun, just waiting until it gets up to temperature kind of, and then as you've probably seen, I do really light passes. I'm not keeping it on any one spot for very long, just keeping it moving so that some of that heat hits all of the foam. It does not take a lot of time for it to close up those cells. Now, in addition to sealing it with heat, we're going to use something else to seal it as well. This right here is called gallery glass. You can buy it at craft stores, and it's a sort of rubberized paint that's designed for simulating the lead that goes between stained glass panels on stained glass windows. And it does a really good job of sealing up the foam, and it's sandable and it's paintable, and it's a nice dark gray color which works as a pretty good base coat. So we're actually going to put that over the whole shell. We're going to just take this stuff, use a paintbrush, and apply it going into all the nooks and crannies and open flat spaces, and just cover the whole thing in a layer of this liquid leading. I don't have a lot of special techniques on how to apply it in this case. It just goes on like paint. You just want to make sure you've got a nice coating on everything, and it's going to do a good job of sealing it up. And also this stuff is very flexible, so if you paint it onto foam, it's going to move really well with the foam. It's not going to be something you have to worry about cracking or breaking over time. Our sealant has dried up nicely and the shell is ready for some color. We're just going to be using acrylic paint for this, mostly brown, little bits of some other stuff swirled in there to give a little bit of variance. It's not complicated, I'm just painting it on. Now, I don't want a completely uniform look. I do want a sort of mixed, swirled color. So I'm going to have a lighter color over here. I'm just going to apply mostly one color with little bits of the other on the same paintbrush. We'll see how that looks. On spots where, I don't have a lot of coverage, I'm actually leaving that as well. You can see I did it on the other one. There's spots where I just left it so that the really dark gray color comes through as some lowlights. I've got this lighter paint for some highlights and I leave some gaps for some lowlights. Got a lot of good variation in the color. Okay, the shell is painted. We're gonna let that dry before we give it a quick clear coat, just to add a little bit of sheen to it. Would you look at that paint job? That is looking fantastic. Now all it needs is just a little bit of smoothness and shine. So we've got some clear lacquer. We're just gonna hit the whole shell with some light coats of that and bring it up. That's gonna protect the paint job and it's also gonna give it that slight sheen that we want to be a little bit more turtle shell-like. I don't wanna do this inside though. To the yard. A little breezy. For the most part, it's good because the fumes don't bother me and it dries really quick. It's very warm, slightly windy, and quite dry out here, so this paint is drying like instantly as I put it down. All right, that's got just the slightest shine to it and I like that look. I think we've got something good here. Wow, one foam turtle shell completed. I mean, technically two, but this one was completed before we started filming. So 2 foam turtle shells completed. I am gonna be making 2 more for the complete set for the Ninja Turtles. However, this is what I was trying to build. This is entirely made out of floor mats, glue, and paint. And I gotta say, I think this works great. It's very lightweight, it's gonna be durable, it's got some flex to it, so you don't have to worry too much about if it's gonna bump into something. And like I said before, there's several ways you could go about attaching this depending on what the rest of your costume is gonna look like. You could have Velcro pads, you could have straps that go under part of your costume. Whatever's gonna work for you, you can easily attach things to the underside of this foam using more of the contact cement. So plenty of options there, and that's a cosplay turtle shell. It's really easy, ignoring the fact that we have like 2.5 hours of HD footage, but we're not gonna show all of that. Guys, thank you so much for watching. If you like this kind of tutorial, these foam builds, please let me know, especially if there's anything specific you'd want to see. Maybe I could give it a try. A thank you shout out to my friend Bill Duran, who, as I said, is a very talented foamsmith and has some books on it. His channel is called Punished Props if you want to check out all of the cool things he's made before. And of course, a very special thank you shout out to all the supporters I have on Patreon. Your support means the world to me and it makes a lot of these videos possible, so thank you very much. If you're interested in helping support me on Patreon, the link for that is down in the description. See you next time.